everyone. It's really great that you've taken the time to listen to this valuable information. You're going to learn about a major advancement in the science of probiotics and a specially developed ultra-low allergy formula of the same remarkable product that has already helped thousands of people. Once you've heard this CD, you'll most likely feel compelled to share this vital information with all your friends, family and acquaintances, because it truly could change lives. It's my great pleasure to be speaking with a highly respected scientist and microbiologist who led a large team of scientists in the research and development of super Synbiotics, a scientific breakthrough in probiotics. Now, before I introduce our esteemed guest, it's important to note many people have already discovered that this breakthrough in scientific research has begun to generate a lot of excitement because it has the potential to provide equal or even greater benefit than super antioxidants. It's really not that many years ago when we were hearing about the theory of free radicals in our bodies and the oxidative damage these were constantly causing to our cells. Today, a large body of scientific evidence has provided strong support in establishing this as fact, and huge numbers of health-conscious people now take daily preventative doses of third-generation super antioxidants because these work effectively towards wiping out those free radicals, as well as protecting our health in many other ways, including their anti-aging properties. For many of us, the knowledge we possess about good and bad bacteria in our bodies and the absolutely crucial role these play in our well-being is somewhat similar to the limited understanding the majority of people used to have about free radicals. And likewise, it's equally important that we all become aware of the vital breakthroughs that have occurred after years of extensive, solid scientific research in this field of good and bad bacteria, and a dramatic advancement in probiotics that now offers us all the chance to experience so many potentially exciting health benefits. Once you've heard the information on this CD, you'll have no doubt that just like super antioxidants are essential, super Synbiotics are actually crucially important for maintaining good health. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our very special guest, the science graduate, microbiology and biochemistry from the University of Sydney and a member of the Australian Society for Microbiology. He studied dairy technology at what is now the University of Western Sydney and worked as a dairy research microbiologist for the New South Wales Department of Agriculture. He worked as the microbiologist for Dairy Farmers Cooperative for 7 years before joining what became part of Burns Philp and Company to conduct research into the fermentation of dairy cultures, including probiotics. During the 90s, he served on the advisory board of the Food Science faculty at the University of Western Sydney, Hawkesbury, and on the management committee of the government-funded Cooperative Research Centre for Food Innovation at the University of New South Wales, which included scientists from DSM, led by John Goodman Fielder, University of New South Wales and CSIRO Division of Dairy Research. The work that this team carried out led to the development of the Lafty range of probiotic cultures, and with the help of researchers from CSIRO Division of Nutrition, to the elucidation of the synergistic interaction between these cultures and several fibre ingredients, which was shown to boost the numbers of probiotic culture cells to levels during their journey down the intestine that are unattainable by any other product. Via this technology, the initial dose of 30 billion cells of Lactobacillus acidophilus and Bifidobacterium lactis are boosted to the equivalent of taking more than 1 trillion cells, thereby delivering unprecedented efficacy. John, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to share your experience and knowledge on probiotics and the extensive scientific research that led to the development of super Synbiotics.
Thank you very much for having me, and I'm very, very pleased to be here. What would you like to know?
John, the best place to begin our discussion is by gaining some understanding of the good versus the bad bacteria in our bodies. What's going on inside us, and is it actually correct that we have some 100 trillion cells in our bodies, yet the majority of those are not our own body cells?
Yes, Mark, that's absolutely true. We're only about 10% human. 90% of the genes that we need to live are actually resident in bacteria, most of which are living in our gut. And there's a combination of good and bad bacteria, and everybody's got some of both. It's a matter of which ones predominate at any one time. And there is a natural balance, and we pick these bacteria up from the environment, but also mainly from our birth canal when we're being born, in our mother's birth canal, and we shovel up those bacteria that are in the vagina, and they populate our bowel. But we also pick up them from our mother's nipples, for example. They're good bacteria. But there are a range of bacteria, some of which carry nasty properties, and if they are allowed to predominate, we call that condition dysbiosis, and that's when the bad things start to happen.
Wow, there's a lot going on to keep the equilibrium correct in our bodies, that's for sure. I think a lot of us wouldn't have been aware of that in the past. Probably like myself, many have a limited knowledge of this. Can you add a little bit more to how things can go wrong and why we definitely need to take decisive action?
Okay. We definitely need a range of bacteria to produce a range of goodies for us to absorb through our intestine. We can't get all of the nutrients and compounds that we need using our own digestive enzymes. The sort of things that can happen to upset that balance is, well, firstly, some people pick up the wrong bacteria at birth and shortly afterwards. That can be a problem. If our mothers have the wrong bacteria in the birth canal, then we pick up the wrong ones ourselves, and that's often what establishes. The next thing that can happen, and unfortunately so many of us have experienced this, is that someone gives us antibiotics. And antibiotics, of course, are designed to kill bacteria, and there's a lot of the good bacteria are killed by what we would call friendly fire, I guess, and leaves us with a predominance of bacteria that aren't affected by the particular antibiotic, and that causes all sorts of problems. For example, there's a lot of gastrointestinal problems. In fact, it's the biggest problem that doctors have, particularly GPs, have to treat these days, and my own GP said they don't know how to treat them. And these problems range from things like gastric reflux right through to Crohn's disease and all sorts of other autoimmune diseases and inflammatory conditions. The bowel being an important organ in the body, it's now being realised that the bacteria inside the bowel, perhaps even more important, and it's actually being called an organ itself. The bacteria are being called an organ. They produce more enzymes than the liver, for example. So if they go wrong and start producing a preponderance of compounds that are bad for us, then all sorts of bad things can happen, from inflammatory bowel diseases to just straight diarrhea or constipation. Constipation, for example, is caused when you have a predominance of bacteria producing nerve poisons, neurotoxins that paralyze the nerves in the bowel and stop peristalsis. You know, a lot of people will tell you, or doctors or dietitians will tell you that it's your diet that's doing it. But we all know people who, it doesn't matter what they eat, they're constipated. And it's because they've got too many of these particular bacteria, particularly E. coli and Clostridia, that can produce these neurotoxins. And we have to suppress those bacteria to reverse those conditions. There's a whole range of autoimmune diseases, and we're going to talk about that in a little while. But damage to the intestine can be done if those antibiotics have wiped out the yogurt-like cultures that normally occupy the small intestine, that's just beneath the stomach. If they get wiped out, then they often get replaced by bacteria that produce gas and chew away also at the wall of the intestine. That's when you can get gastric reflux, because the gas blows the stomach contents, the acid, up the esophagus, and you can get also leaky gut or translocation of various substances and bacteria through the damaged gut wall as well. And we have doctors treating those sorts of conditions, particularly with drugs. Gastric reflux is often treated by proton pump inhibitors that switch off acid production, and that's treating the symptom and not the cause. And those bad bacteria can still be damaging the lining of the small intestine and leading to all sorts of complications. People who are on those drugs, for example, 60 or 70% of people in hospital with pneumonia have been on that particular drug. It also is known to cause osteoporosis. So what we're talking about now is we can switch that off in a natural way by inhibiting the bad bacteria that are causing the problems. And we can get just as effective an outcome without all the nasty side effects of drugs, and because we're treating the cause naturally without just treating the symptoms, and the symptoms disappear. So that's an important thing to realise when we go on talking about these things.
Yeah, it certainly is. John, a lot of people listening to this CD will have heard you speak. You've been a very sought-after speaker all around the country and giving many lectures on the super symbiotics and their amazing benefits. Those of us who've attended these lectures have heard you mention some of the undesirable bad bacteria inhabit our small intestine. They actually bind to structures called Peyer's patches, and that can also weaken our immune system. Could you explain a little bit more about how the bad bacteria on Peyer's patches also increase inflammation, while the good bacteria can actually reduce that and improve resistance to infection and more?
Right. It's very important to realise that the immune system, most of its receptors, or most of its view on the outside world, if you like, is via these receptors, the Peyer's patches, in the intestine. And the intestine, of course, is exposed to all sorts of stuff, food, bacteria and so on, from the outside world, and the immune system has to work out whether it's dealing with friend or foe or food. And it does that in various clever ways. And these Peyer's patches actually detect bacteria. As these bacteria stick to it, different bacteria produce different effects. Bad bacteria produce increased inflammation, and that's particularly significant if you're genetically pre-programmed to suffer from, say, asthma, hay fever, eczema, because they're inflammatory conditions. Now, I've got the genes for the asthma, hay fever, and I've never had the eczema, but one of my grandchildren has. And I know that I can switch that off with these particular super symbiotics, and it's very effective. I don't react now at all when my wife does the vacuum cleaning. In fact, I can vacuum the whole house myself and not sneeze once, even though I'm allergic to dust mites. So one important thing to realise is that a lot of diseases you need a particular gene for, but you also need particular bacteria to be present in the gut to trigger that condition, and we'll be talking a bit more about that later. If somebody says, oh, it's genetic, that doesn't mean you've only got a drug to take to suppress the symptoms. You can actually switch it off by switching down or turning down the inflammatory condition. Inflammation, by the way, is the immune system's first line of defense against infection, so you need some of that happening, but often people have too much of it happening, and that has all sorts of ramifications right throughout their body, even including major depression. If you've got a constant source of inflammation, in other words, even as simple as bad bacteria stuck to your Peyer's patches, then you're 50% likely to suffer from major clinical depression. So because the brain gets inflamed. So it's very important to realise that one of the actions of these super symbiotics, providing you have the right cultures, the right strains, is to switch off or suppress at least that immune response, which is over-inflammation. So we just want to regulate it to exactly the right level, and that's been shown in research to happen when a particular Lactobacillus acidophilus called LAFT-L10 is used, and it's very effective.
There's so much to learn, and I'm sure it'll be overwhelming for some, but very exciting for others to think of the benefits that could be realised by using a product like this. Moving on to the super symbiotics in a little bit more detail, John, you led a team of sometimes up to 120 research scientists and associated staff over a period of 8 years in the development of more than just a symbiotic, in fact, the world's very first super symbiotic. Would you explain a bit more to us about that and how probiotics work and how super symbiotics work so much better than just a basic probiotic?
Okay, there are two important factors to realise, or two qualities, if you like, with probiotics. One is the strain itself, and it's not just Lactobacillus acidophilus per se, because there are strains of Lactobacillus acidophilus. It's not just Bifidobacterium lactis per se, because there are different strains of them. And there's been some interesting work done at the Camden Menangle Elizabeth MacArthur Research Institute just outside of Sydney here, where a researcher has showed that he's shown that you actually can stimulate the growth of pathogens if you use the wrong probiotic culture. And those cultures, although they've got the same names as good probiotics, they're not necessarily doing the right job. And about a third of the probiotic cultures that are on the market seem to fit into that category, where they could actually stimulate the growth of a really bad E. coli that actually was capable of killing people. So it's important to know that the particular culture you're using actually suppresses the bad bugs. Now, it's particularly important when we start to amplify the impact of those probiotic bacteria by causing them to multiply to unprecedented levels by feeding them what I could colloquially call the packed lunch of these prebiotic fibre ingredients, and not only just one that you sometimes find in probiotics, and that might be like fructooligosaccharides, but to combine different prebiotic ingredients that boost the cultures in different ways at different points in the intestine. Because, for example, fructooligosaccharides or inulin, that sort of thing, will just boost it in the ascending colon, the first part of the large intestine, whereas a more slowly degradable starch, resistant starch, or an arabinogalactan, this sort of thing, will provide a slow boost right through not only the ascending but the transverse and descending colon as well. So all these things are important. You've got to know how to combine these various synbiotics, put together probiotics and prebiotics into a synergistic combination called synbiotics to get the absolute maximum boost effect. And when you do that, if you've done it to a culture that is a very good probiotic culture, one that inhibits bad bacteria, then you will see effects in the range that's normally restricted to using drugs. So just normal probiotics on their own don't do a great deal. It's very difficult to get a positive effect out of just one pill, for example, of probiotic cultures. But if you start to put together a powder that has got a significant level of these fibre ingredients in that have been carefully selected from careful research, then you can get this incredible boost effect of, say, 50-fold or perhaps more in certain individuals. And then you start to see, if you can boost the levels up to over 1 trillion, then you start to see significant health impacts, which you don't see if you're just taking a pill of a leading probiotic that's on the market at the moment.
Well, there's a lot to know there compared to what most of us, I guess, we've seen some of the very comical little ads that just remind us to take a probiotic if we've had a couple of things go wrong. There's so much more to probiotics and super symbiotics than what most of us would be aware of. It's my understanding that one dual sachet of this product, which is around about a teaspoonful, contains around 30 billion probiotic culture cells plus your patented booster. And the patented booster then causes these to rapidly multiply in the gut to over 1.5 trillion powerful good bacteria of the type you've just been discussing. This has never been achieved before, and it's why this super symbiotic is delivering such remarkable results. It would have to mean that it's equivalent to over 60 capsules of some of the popular ones, so that makes it very economical. John, could you explain any extra points for our listeners, and also the importance and relevance of the recent development of this new ultra-low allergy formula?
Yeah, sure. That principle, we first put it together in a product that was very much designed to be a drink that people would like, with a particular flavouring in it and so on, and a little bit of sugar and things like that, and some milk powder to help it disperse and be a really nice drink, and people loved it. The problem there is that not in the level of efficacy or anything like that, because it was very efficacious, but certain, particularly naturopaths, would be saying to their patients, avoid milk, avoid sugar, and that product had both those things in, and it didn't compromise the performance of the product. In fact, it probably enhanced it. But there were there was certain people who felt that they couldn't take it. So what we wanted to do was make it more amenable, more available, if you like, to a wider range of people. And some people can't eat sweet corn and its derivatives. So we took out the high maize, which comes from sweet corn, and we replaced it with fibre, which comes from a larch tree. And the larch tree is a member of the pine tree family, so anybody who's allergic to pine trees should beware of that. But apart from that aspect, it's a very effective and simple formula with just the inulin, the fibre, and the two cultures that we have, the two Lafty cultures, and it's very, very effective and now works for a wider range of people.
Yeah, it must be very exciting for anyone who was a little bit cautious, although I knew people that took that previous formula that had some intolerances to dairy, and that it was such a minute amount it didn't matter. But this is certainly addresses that so very well. John, there's been some studies that showed possible bacterial infections or connections with Alzheimer's and even heart disease. So could this mean that the possibility of there being benefits from super symbiotics in these, as well as your translocation or leaky gut syndrome?
Yes, definitely. The thing that has been discovered in recent decades, actually, is that bacteria are a major component of heart disease, and it's also suspected to be a component in Alzheimer's as well. And some Finnish scientists back in 1996, I think it was, observed that Alzheimer's brains, people who died of Alzheimer's, their brains were infected with a bacterium called chlamydia pneumoniae, which is a bug that commonly can cause pneumonia. So assuming that this is the cause, one of the causes at least, of Alzheimer's, and it seems likely that it is, then it's probably getting into the bloodstream through the lungs and infiltrating the brain that way. Now, what we're talking about then as a line of resistance to that or defence to that is to boost the immune response to any invasions of bacteria. So we know that these super symbiotics actually boost the immune system and enable it to fight off these infections more effectively. With heart disease, there's been something in the media lately about gum disease bacteria causing heart disease. This has been known for quite a number of years, and we know, for example, from a paper that was published in the Australian Society of Microbiology journal, that the top 3 bacteria that cause heart disease are gum disease or oral bacteria. One of them causes gingivitis, and its name is Porphyromonas gingivalis, and that's the most significant cause of heart disease. And what we think is happening there is that bacteria like those and others like the chlamydia pneumoniae, which is also involved in a lot of heart disease, and other bacteria like Helicobacter pylori, the stomach ulcer bug, that's also involved. They're getting into the bloodstream in large numbers, whether it be through the gut, in the case of the Helicobacter, or through the lungs, or through the gums, bleeding gums, so look after your teeth. Get in, and then on their surface they've got structures that resemble structures in us, and particularly in the case of heart disease, it's the mimic protein that they're carrying is mimicking myosin, which is a molecule that's prevalent in the wall of the arteries. And when the antibodies are made against that molecule, that mimic molecule, they also recognize that molecule in our arteries, and it starts forming plaque. And then bacteria lodge in that plaque, go inside the human cells in the wall of the arteries, and rupture the actual wall of the artery, releasing clotting factors which cause the blood to clot, which blocks the artery that feeds the muscle of the heart. And that's when you get your coronary occlusion or blockage of the coronal arteries to the heart, and that's your heart attack. So again, I'm not claiming that we can cure heart disease with these super symbiotics, but we should we would expect to see a reduction in the incidence of heart disease if everybody was taking these products.
Well, that's quite a breakthrough. John, we're limited by time. I might ask if you could perhaps share a testimony that you've come across of someone who's had extraordinary results, just for the benefit of our listeners.
Yeah, sure. All right. I'll just mention Crohn's disease, for example. Very difficult to treat. Usually when someone's got Crohn's disease, they've got genes for it, and they're predisposed to it. And then it's a bacterial infection that triggers the whole thing, and it's like the heart attack thing. Bacteria getting into the bloodstream with mimic proteins that mimic, in this case, the wall of the intestine, antibodies attacking that. So you've got a two-pronged thing happening. You've got bacteria that are actually chewing away at the wall and ulcerating it, of the colon this is, and at the same time you've got antibodies that have been induced or triggered by these bacteria getting into the bloodstream. And they're finding their way to the colon and attacking that and inflaming it. And we had one girl, a naturopath, told me that she had a 14-year-old girl. The doctors wanted to remove her colon. It was so badly deteriorated with Crohn's disease. And she went on to this super Synbiotic, and within 4 days the rectal bleeding and the pain stopped. 6 months later, after being on the product all that time, she had a colonoscopy and the colon was perfect. So that's the sort of results we're seeing, and other people have seen the same thing. And Crohn's disease is not treatable at all. Really what they do is normally the doctors just give you anti-inflammatory drugs like cortisones to tone down the inflammation, but it doesn't get to the root cause. It's just treating the symptoms, which so many of the drugs that we use these days are designed to do, just treat symptoms. They don't get to the cause. But when you can suppress the bad bacteria that are causing the problem, then this condition reverses, and we've seen it so many times.
That's extraordinary. I know that for the benefit of those listening to this CD, if they were to talk to the person who shared it with them, more than likely that person will also know some amazing results that have happened out there, and using a totally natural product. It's such a wonderful breakthrough. John, could you just explain, for the benefit of practitioners, the patented process that allows this super Synbiotic to be fully viable without the need for constant refrigeration? For instance, the anhydrous nitrogen process, and why this ultra-low allergy formula is even, again, as you mentioned, it's better than the previous one, but just a wrap up on that of why it's that much better.
Yeah. Okay. In the dual sachet configuration, we actually separate the very dry culture, which has about 0.5% moisture, and we want to keep it very dry, from the more moist packed lunch, which can have as much as 10-15% moisture in those powders. And we don't want the water to migrate from the packed lunch into the cultures and bring them back to life prematurely. That would reduce the shelf life. So what we've done is, the first thing is we separated the two. We packaged them in a triple laminate, which has got a foil inner layer. It's actually poly, then foil, then paper on the outside, and that stops ingress of moisture from the outside and also stops oxygen getting in, which is another enemy, if you like, of the cultures. We want to keep them protected from that. We flush the sachets with nitrogen, very dry nitrogen, as you said. And the next thing we did when we moved from the dairy formula, which had anhydrous or moisture-free lactose in the culture sachet mixed in with the culture, what we did is we took that out and we put in anhydrous trehalose, which actually even has a drying action again on the culture and makes sure that that further increases the shelf life. So they're the things we've done, and the whole thing is it's always better with any probiotic of this type, bifidobacteria in particular, at the more sensitive end in terms of thermal abuse susceptibility. So it's always better to refrigerate it. However, when I go on a trip, I just take the sachets at room temperature. I might travel for, as I did last year, for 3 months in Europe or 2 months, and didn't bother to refrigerate it because I know that I would end up leaving it in a fridge somewhere in a hotel room if I did that. But it worked just as well on my irritable bowel syndrome at the end of the trip as it did at the beginning. So it has that improved stability, and but it's if you're going to keep it for as long as the shelf life on the box says, then it's always best to keep it under refrigeration like it says on the box.
John, if you could just tell us how much to take, how often, and for how long?
Firstly, everybody's an individual, so the amount should be determined by you, but as a rule of thumb, one dose every couple of days or every day is sufficient for people who are taking it just like they might take their vitamins every day or every second day or whatever. So that's just for general maintenance of good health. If you're like me and you've got irritable bowel syndrome or something else you're trying to treat, Crohn's disease, hay fever, whatever, if you're trying to treat a particular disease or disorder, then you need to up the ante to maybe 2 or 3 doses a day. Now, they can be all together after breakfast if you couldn't be bothered taking them after every meal. But the idea is every time you eat food without these cultures in them, they're going to feed the bad bugs. It's just a matter of what's the best outcome for you. It's better to have a full stomach than an empty stomach because then that buffers the stomach acid, which can then do less damage to the cultures. But apart from that, you should adjust it according to the outcomes that you experience with it. So if one dose works, but you want more effect, take 2, and so on. You can't overdose on it. The worst that will happen is you get an increase in flatulence if you take too much, because inulin, which is one of the ingredients, is one of the ingredients in baked beans that gives you gas, you see. So that's the worst that will happen to you, and then you know to back off.
And I believe that the die-off of the bad bacteria can also add to some of that flatulence. Is that right?
Yes, there is a period of adjustment often with people. I mean, some people start taking it and don't notice anything. Other people will notice that there can be an increase in flatulence when they take it, and then that drops away again as all the bad bacteria have been overcome. But there is a myth that you can actually replace the bacteria that have been wiped out by antibiotics. The fact is you might have lost 200 species, I'm plucking a number out of the air, out of the 1,000 that were there before. And we're not allowed by law to replace a lot of those good bacteria. And so all we can do is give you cultures that are what they call GRAS status, generally regarded as safe, that they've been in the food supply for millennia and we're absolutely sure they're not going to cause you any problems. And the governing bodies then say, yes, you can use that culture. But all we can hope to do is put in enough on an ongoing basis to affect the balance of bugs and skew it towards the good bugs. But the trouble is, when you stop taking it, it'll bounce back. Your actual balance in your gut will bounce back to what it was before. And if that was a bad balance, it'll bounce back to that bad balance and cause all the problems again. So we're talking about control here, we're not talking about cure. So it's just there is nothing on the market that can replace all the bugs that have been lost due to the collateral damage of antibiotics.
Yeah, certainly an important issue to be aware of. As we sum up, one thing that's really struck me during our conversation is that with there being so many trillions of bad bacteria in our systems, then just taking a few billion, as is the case that most of us have done in the past before this type of product became available, you're really fighting a huge uphill battle, whereas now with this super Synbiotic, you can be putting doses in that then equate to 1.5 trillion at a time instead of just a few billion, and it must be doing an extraordinary benefit to putting that equilibrium more back into place where it should be, that's for sure.
That's absolutely right. And, I did bump into a health food store owner who was marketing the Super Synbiotic in a limited way because we just wanted to test it out. And she said that people come and they try the leading brand that's on the market that everybody will be aware of, and they'd come back and they'd say, well, that didn't do much. And she said, well, try this one. And they'd come back and say, wow, what a difference. And I'm quoting her exactly. So, yeah, it's a significant leap forward.
Yeah, it's very exciting, and because we've quite a few of us have already seen the amazing results of the first formula, the one with the light amount of dairy in it, it's very exciting now to have the ultra-low allergy one, and knowing that we're going to see those results continue, and so many people are going to be helped. So it's very exciting. I want to thank you, John, for your time. It's been invaluable for our listeners, and I invite everyone who's heard this CD to please be sure to get back in touch with the person who shared this with you to discover how to obtain your own super Synbiotics. These really are a massive breakthrough in the field of probiotics. It's just extraordinary. So thanks again, John.
You're very welcome, Mark.
Thanks a lot.